You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, 3 Men and a Mystery, DNA ID, Malice, All Things Crime, and Riddle Me That. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac Speaking. On the afternoon of March 22, 1970, a pregnant 22-year-old woman named Kathleen Johns, accompanied by her 10-month-old daughter Jennifer, set out on the arduous journey from their San Bernardino home in Southern California to visit Kathleen's mother, who lived in Petaluma, which is just 25 miles northwest of Vallejo. As Kathleen was driving on Highway 132 at approximately 11:15 p.m. and about 20 miles west of downtown Modesto, she noticed a man driving behind her, flashing his headlights and gesturing for her to pull over. After driving on for a while, Kathleen eventually pulled her vehicle onto the shoulder, just east of South Bird Road. The man pulled his vehicle in behind Kathleen's 1957 Chevy station wagon, exited his car, and approached Kathleen's driver's side door, informing her that her rear wheel looked loose and wobbly, and that the lug nuts likely needed tightening. He offered to help Kathleen, and she accepted. The man went back to his car and got a tire wrench from his vehicle, and seemingly began to tighten the rear wheel of Kathleen's Chevy. But it would later seem that this man wasn't there to aid Kathleen in a time of need. He was there to lay a trap and ensnare the woman into his clutches by deliberately loosening the lug nuts on her wheel. After bidding Kathleen farewell and driving away, the young woman from San Bernardino pulled away to resume her journey, but several yards down the road, her vehicle juddered to a full stop as her wheel came loose and fell off the car. Just a few seconds later, the man who had begun to drive away and past Kathleen stopped his car and began to back up. The driver had returned, expressing sympathy for Kathleen's plight, and he offered to take her to the nearest service station. Out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, and with not many options, Kathleen cautiously agreed. After all, the Good Samaritan in the other car had been friendly and helpful as far as Kathleen could tell. She gathered up her young daughter and got into the passenger side of the man's car. In Robert Graysmith's 1986 book, Zodiac, the author stated that when the abductor offered Kathleen a lift to the nearest service station, quote, Kathleen gathered up Jennifer and got into the man's car. Just as they were pulling out, she noticed that the lights to her car were still on, and remembered that the keys were still in the ignition. The man smiled, went back to her car, snapped off the lights, and pocketed the keys. But once the journey began, the man was apparently reluctant to stop at any of the service stations they passed, claiming they were closed. Kathleen was then driven around for an extended period of time, somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours, according to Kathleen's estimates. They ambled along dark back roads, possibly close to the city of Tracy, before Kathleen managed to escape from the car when the man who was driving had to slow down, after driving up the wrong way on a ramp. Kathleen leapt into a field with her daughter by Highway 132. Kathleen Johns stated that the man was friendly in some accounts of her story during a Stanislaus County interview on March 23, 1970, but other times she painted a more sinister picture. Investigators would state that the man, quote, drove around in the county area, possibly near Tracy, for approximately 1 hour to 1.5 hours, and several times she had asked the suspect if he intended to stop at a station in order for her to seek help to have her vehicle repaired. Complainant stated the suspect was quite friendly with her, did not make any advances toward her, or threats toward her when asked if he was going to stop. He would merely elude the question and start talking about something else. Kathleen's story culminated with her final moments in the suspect's vehicle, with law enforcement detailing that, quote, she gets quite frightened, feeling that possibly the suspect intended to do some physical injury to her, and that when the suspect stopped at a stop sign, the exact area or location unknown, she jumped from the vehicle carrying her daughter and ran into a field nearby, hiding from the suspect. Complainant said the suspect merely closed the door and then had driven away. Kathleen was able to recall the interior of the vehicle as, quote, messy. She had noticed men's and children's clothing scattered about, books and papers, a black rubber-handled flashlight, and 2 colored plastic scouring pads on the console dashboard. Kathleen estimated that the smaller patterned t-shirts were of the age range of 8 to 12 years old. Kathleen described her abductor as white, around 30 years of age, 5'9" in height, and weighing 160 pounds with dark hair. He was clean cut, having the traits of a serviceman. During Kathleen's ordeal in the car, she recalled his highly polished shoes reflecting the yellow lights from the car interior, likening them to Navy shoes. He wore dark windbreaker, black or dark blue bell-bottom pants, along with black plastic eyeglasses that were affixed to his head by a band of elastic. She described his vehicle as American-made, late model, light tan in color, 2-door with old-style California plates.
After an indeterminate period of time in the field, Kathleen Johns made her way back to the roadside edge, believed to be Highway 132, and was rescued by a passing motorist. The police report stated, quote, Mrs. Johns then got to the roadway or highway. This part is not clear to the undersigned or to the Stanislaus Deputy Mr. Lovett, but finally did get back on the highway or near Highway 132, where she was given a ride by some people from Missouri. These people drove a hysterical Kathleen Johns to Patterson Police Department about 19 miles away to seek help, arriving at 2:30 a.m. What makes little sense is why would some people from Missouri presumably drive 19 miles out of their way, helping a pregnant and hysterical woman accompanied by a 10-month-old child, yet not one of the benevolent occupants of the mystery vehicle felt the need to accompany Kathleen Johns the final few yards into the police station for comfort and support. Upon her arrival at the Patterson Police Department, it is then she noticed the Presidio Heights sketch of the Zodiac killer hanging on the wall and declared to the duty sergeant Charles McNatt that this was the man that abducted her. Deputy Lovett set out to locate her vehicle and discovered the 1957 Chevrolet station wagon burning just east of South Bird Road. Reed and Son towing services were called to retrieve the vehicle, with Mr. Reed noticing the rear wheel only had 2 loose lugs attached, so removed 2 from the right front wheel to secure the rear wheel before towing it back to impound. He advised that he had personally not observed any keys when he towed the vehicle. According to author Robert Graysmith, who told the story of Kathleen Johns in his Zodiac book, she, quote, couldn't handle it anymore, so I decided the next time he came to one of those Hollywood stops, you know, not a complete stop, that he made at the different stop signs, I was going to jump out. Suddenly the car came to a halt. The man had inadvertently driven up the freeway off-ramp. I scooped up Jennifer and jumped from the car, dashed across the road and leapt into an irrigation ditch surrounded by tall grass in the middle of a field. It was all wine vineyard with a little gully, and I just laid as flat as I could. This was highlighted by Zodiac researcher Jean Quasar, who stated in an article, quote, Johns made many mistakes in her retelling of the events that proved damning to her own initial story, let alone the legend she later adopted. One very significant one is that she said when she escaped from the Zodiac into the fields, she plainly described them as vineyards. The only vineyards around 132 are at Bird Road. They are still there today. The only thing Johns has ever been able to clearly describe is the immediate area of where she was initially stopped. No other place. If this were the case, then the vineyards Kathleen escaped into were just a few hundred meters west of where her vehicle was located. she would have been abducted and rescued a stone's throw from one another after an ordeal lasting anywhere up to 2 hours in duration. Another curious statement in Robert Graysmith's book revised the time she left her San Bernardino residence on March the 22nd, 1970, by stating, quote, Kathleen Johns bundled up her 10-month-old daughter Jennifer and left her home in San Bernardino at 7 p.m. for the trip to Petaluma, a small dairy farming community where her sick mother lived. It was easier to travel at night while the baby slept. Had she left her San Bernardino residence at 7 p.m. and travelled 368 miles to South Bird Road where she entered the man's vehicle, she would have needed to maintain an average speed of 86 miles an hour in a vehicle she described as clunky, while pregnant and accompanied by a 10-month-old child. However, if she had left her San Bernardino home at 7 p.m. and arrived at South Bird Road at 2 p.m. without an abduction, her average speed drops to a more reasonable 51 miles per hour.
4 months after the questionable Kathleen Johns abduction, the Zodiac would lay claim to targeting the young woman in a letter mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle on July 24, 1970. The letter read, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am rather unhappy because you people will not wear some nice Zodiac buttons. So now I have a little list, starting with that woman and her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple hours one evening, a few months back, that ended in my burning her car where I found them." Despite claiming his involvement in Kathleen's abduction, the Zodiac failed to provide any information other than was available in the newspapers, leading to speculation it was just more publicity hunting by the Bay Area killer. Despite stating that the man was friendly at the outset of their journey that night, it appears that Kathleen Johns observed the man snap off her lights and pocket the keys to her vehicle, but she never at any point requested her keys back, which apparently were never retrieved or observed by Mr. Reed of Reed & Son Towing Services when he towed Kathleen's vehicle after it was found. The inconsistencies and anomalies in Kathleen Johns' story, coupled with the actions of her apparent abductor, has led many to doubt whether this abduction was an abduction at all, and if it occurred, had anything to do with the infamous Zodiac killer. The Zodiac went out of his way during the 4 canonical attacks to provide proof he was the responsible in each instance. But subsequent to the bus bomb letter on November 9, 1969, this proof was severely lacking, overtaken by insinuation and suggestion. 1 month after the Kathleen Johns affair, on April 19, 1970, Robert Michael Salem would be discovered murdered in his 745 Stevenson Street, San Francisco apartment. In an article by Paul Avery titled, "The Bloody Satan Murder," it detailed that police didn't believe this murder was related to the Zodiac killer, stating, quote, "The 40-year-old designer of lamps had been repeatedly stabbed with a long-bladed knife. The killer had apparently tried to decapitate his victim, and when that failed, he cut off Salem's left ear, carrying it away with him when he fled. There was also this bizarre touch. Scrawled on the wall in Salem's blood were the words, 'Satan saves.' The killer then, in larger letters, wrote Zodiac and drew a strange symbol resembling a crucified man. The same symbol had been drawn on Salem's stomach. Although this murder is routinely dismissed as a Zodiac crime, it was committed only 4 months after the Melvin Belli letter on December 20th, 1969, in which the Zodiac seemingly invoked the language used by the murderer of Frances Brown in 1945. Frances Brown was discovered with multiple knife wounds on December 10, 1945, at her 3941 North Pine Grove apartment in Edgewater, Chicago. She was found with a knife protruding from her neck, along with a bullet wound to her head. Her killer had scrawled a message in red lipstick on the wall of her apartment above a lamp. It read, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." This language was very similar to the language adopted by the Zodiac killer in the Melvin Belli letter, who wrote phrases such as, "I will lose all control of myself. Please help me, and I cannot remain in control for much longer." The killer of Frances Brown, believed to be a man named William Hearns, who was convicted of the crime, was also found responsible for 2 other murders that included the mutilation and dismemberment of 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan in January 1946. The Robert Salem murder also exhibited a message in red on the apartment wall, carried the name of Zodiac, and involved the mutilation of the corpse by way of dismemberment. One of his ears had been removed. If the killer of Robert Salem wasn't the Zodiac, then was this person using the Zodiac pseudonym able to read into the contents of the Melvin Belli letter and orchestrate a crime that somewhat mirrored the crimes attributed to William Hearns? Or was the wording adopted in the Melvin Belli letter not in any way derived from the Francis Brown murder scene? And was the apartment of Robert Salem found the way it was with the pseudonym of Zodiac scrawled on the wall? All just an unnerving coincidence.
The San Francisco Chronicle article on April 20th, 1970 stated that, quote, Salem's designs have been exhibited in England, Japan and Russia under State Department cultural exchange programs. Until last year, which was 1969, he had been the lighting designer for restoration of the historic Hazlitt Warehouse on Hyde Street. The address of the Hazlitt Warehouse was listed as 680 Beach Street at Hyde, Russian Hill, San Francisco. It was situated just 1.5 miles from where Paul Stine began his fateful journey on October the 11th, 1969. Wikipedia details this area. Quote, during the 1960s, California was the site of many outdoor art fairs which nurtured a culture of independent artists and craftspersons. At this time, there was an effort to sell crafts on the sidewalks of the liberal Haight-Ashbury neighborhood of San Francisco. Artists and street performers who illegally set up in public areas were frequently harassed and arrested by the police. In the 700 block of Beach Street, adjacent to Victorian Park and near Fisherman's Wharf, between 15 and 25 artists would set up their displays and use lookouts to alert them to the arrival of police. Robert Salem was an artist and designer of lamps who had involvement with the Hazlitt Warehouse at 680 Beach Street, making a dubious communication linked with the Zodiac killer slightly more interesting. Mailed 4 days before the Paul Stine murder to Sergeant John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department, it contained the cryptic message of, quote, go to 56 Beach Street. I get the name Jerry. Perhaps he knows people, or his name is XXXXXXX. This means we have a possible Zodiac communication mailed on October the 7th, 1969, identifying Beach Street, a location known to be connected to Robert Salem at that time, who was drawn into the Zodiac killer story by the pseudonym of Zodiac written on his 745 Stevenson Street apartment wall subsequent to his murder.
The same day that the Robert Salem murder was featured in the San Francisco Chronicle, another communication will be mailed by the Zodiac, postmarked April 20th, 1970. It's widely been labeled the My Name Is letter because it opens with the introduction of, quote, this is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is. It was followed by a 13-character code, which is unsolved to this day. This code and the now solved 340 cipher will be addressed in a separate episode, and we'll explore any connections that may exist between the two. The rest of the April 20th letter read, I am mildly curious as to how much money you have on my head now. I hope you do not think I was the one who wiped out the Blue Meanie with a bomb at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one. It just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. But there's more glory in killing a cop than a kid, because a cop can shoot back. I've killed 10 people to date. It would have been a lot more, except that my bus bomb was the dud. I was swamped out by the rain we had a while back. The letter also contained a bus bomb diagram, accompanied by instructions on its method of operation, along with a new victim total of 10. Authorities believe the bomb diagram was fully functional. The Blue Meanie that Zodiac was referring to in the letter was San Francisco police officer 44-year-old Brian McDonnell, who was killed on February 16, 1970, just 2 months earlier. He suffered devastating injuries when a bomb packed with fence staples exploded on the outside ledge of Park Police Station, bordering the Golden Gate Park in the Upper Haight area of San Francisco. The Desert Sun newspaper on February 17, 1970, ran an article that read, quote, Haight-Ashbury Police Station rocked by bomb. 6 officers injured in blast, showering big U-shaped staples. It didn't take long for the Zodiac to further capitalize on the murder of Brian McDonnell. When 8 days after this latest letter, he mailed the dragon card depicting 2 characters from the book, Don Quixote, authored by Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, and originally published in 2 parts in 1605 and 1615. The 2 characters were Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, who set out on a mission to revive chivalry and serve their nation. A statue of the author, Don Quixote, and Sancho Panza can be found in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, just 1 mile from the site of the Park Police Station bombing. Written on the dragon card alongside the characters of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, the Zodiac stated, quote, I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast. The word blast was written noticeably larger as if to mimic the headlines from the Desert Sun newspaper. The Zodiac also added to the card the following quote, If you don't want me to have this blast, you must do 2 things. Tell everyone about the bus bomb with all the details. I would like to see some nice Zodiac buttons wandering around town. Everyone else has these buttons like Black Power, Melvin Eats Blubber, etc. Well, it would sure cheer me up considerably if I saw a lot of people wearing my button. Please, no nasty one like Melvin's. Thank you.
In the upcoming podcasts, it will be shown that many of the letters and cards associated with the Zodiac Killer have been extremely cleverly designed, disguised by their simplicity. The Zodiac Killer may not have been a genius, but his communications were a tour de force, carrying hidden meanings so subtle they have remained hidden for half a century. Many of these communications are heavily intertwined, and hopefully this interconnectivity will change some people's minds on Zodiac correspondence once considered to have been penned by a hoaxer. Although not proven, the letter mailed on April 20th, 1970 may contain a subtle reference to the murder of a policeman in 1956, disguised in the phrase of, quote, There is more glory in killing a cop than a kid, because a cop can shoot back. The letter itself referenced the end of watch of San Francisco police officer Brian McDonnell, murdered on February 16th, 1970, in the Park Police Station bombing, but the following section stating there is more glory in killing a cop may have sinister overtones when we consider that Brian McDonnell's uncle was also murdered on December 30th, 1956, while socialising with a friend in a tavern. Sergeant Joseph Lacey, 40 years of age, was off duty and drinking in a local establishment when 2 men burst into the bar declaring a robbery, one of whom was armed with a .38 caliber handgun. Sergeant Joseph Lacey drew his gun and attempted to put a stop to the robbery, but was beaten to the draw and sadly killed. One of the robbers was apprehended shortly after the crime and pled guilty to first-degree murder. The actual shooter of Sergeant Lacey remained a free man for nearly 3 years before being captured and found guilty of second-degree murder. Therefore, the unfortunate wording of the Zodiac Killer stating, quote, There is more glory in killing a cop than a kid, because a cop can shoot back, is either pure coincidence yet again, or the words of the Zodiac Killer were specifically chosen on purpose to align with the murder of Officer Brian McDonnell, bringing nephew and uncle together in one short paragraph. This connection is obviously unproven, but the subtlety exhibited in later communications may make you think again.
The April 20th, 1970 letter depicted a killer who denied any involvement in the murder of Officer Brian McDonnell, writing, quote, I hope you do not think I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one. It just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. The Zodiac stated that he wasn't prepared to move in on someone else's territory. But that opens up the possibility of what territory he was prepared to move into, by simultaneously blowing up a school bus, and possibly targeting the San Francisco Police Department in similar fashion, to the atrocity that befell the Park Police Station.
That answer may have come just 2 months later, when on June the 26th, 1970, the Zodiac Killer mailed the button letter and Phillips 66 map to the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper, promising to annihilate a school bus under the noses of the San Francisco Police Department. The Zodiac Killer gave us a set of instructions to where his bomb was to be set, disguised in a map and 32-character code. The territory the Zodiac Killer chose to wreak havoc upon in the city of San Francisco will be argued to be just 3 miles south of Park Police Station. That is where we set our sights in the next Zodiac Killer podcast. Okay, Mark, I'll kick this off with, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of people from Missouri who rescued Kathleen Johns. There is a risk stopping on any lonely stretch of road to aid a stricken motorist or any person in distress for fear of an ambush. Yet these people took the risk, helped Kathleen Johns, and drove presumably out of their way for 20 to 30 minutes to Patterson Police Station. Would you, Mike, have took the time to escort the young woman with a child the final few yards into the police station?
Yeah, I think I would have. In my nature, I feel like I want to help people, so I try to think the best of them. I don't think of threats normally. Obviously, if I pull up and I see some shady guy hiding in the back of the car or in the bushes and someone's waving me down, I might think twice about it. But I think in her case, seeing a lonely woman and a baby with her, I'd want to help them. If my wife and one of my kids were stuck on the side of the road, I would hope someone good, not a bad person, because there's bad people out there too, but I would hope that someone would come along and offer them help. So I'd sort of want to do the same thing.
Because according to the report, there was no mention of any people escorting it into the police station, was there?
No, and it may be something as simple as, okay, we got you here to the police station, but we don't want to get involved anymore, so you're safe, but we don't want to be part of this.
Do you think it's strange that after 50 years, a lot of people want to interject themselves into the Zodiac scene for a bit of publicity, and yet here we have a truck driver who presumably stopped before the people from Missouri, and the people from Missouri, yet none of them have ever come forward in the intervening 50 years?
I wonder if a truck driver, depending on where he was from, what part of California or outside of California, he may not have known to come forward once he was out of the picture. He may not have ever heard of the case again. It might not have made headlines in that area right away, or it might not have been broadcast in his area, and he might have just somehow missed it. Same thing with people that are traveling from Missouri. They may have just been visiting and left and never heard of the case again. It could be something as simple as that.
Now, in the Robert Graysmith book, it stated that Kathleen Johns escaped into vineyards and the abductor had inadvertently driven up a freeway off-ramp. The only location where an interchange and vineyards coexist on Highway 132 is located a few hundred yards from the location where she was stopped by her abductor, and her vehicle was burnt out. Also, we have her entering the man's car shortly after 11:15 p.m. and rescued at about 2 a.m., just being driven around the outskirts of Tracy. We also have more discrepancy in the Graysmith book. Kathleen Johns described them passing the Arco gas station at Chrisman Road, travelling onwards, passing several exits after the first exit, before the abductor turned off. Now, Highway 132 switches to Interstate 580 just after Chrisman Road. If the abductor left Interstate 580 after several exits, he would not have been at Tracy, but closer to Livermore, heading in the direction of Pleasanton. Now, what do you make of all these discrepancies, Mike? Do you think the abductor was Zodiac, a random person, or Kathleen Johns manufactured the entire story for publicity?
Well, let me sort of take it backwards. I can't imagine why Kathleen Johns would make the story up, sure she could try and get some publicity out of it, but, Zodiac wasn't in that area at that time. Zodiac wasn't committing the kind of crimes as she describes, so there's no guarantee she would connect herself to the case if she was just looking for 15 minutes of fame. Some people have thrown out a theory that maybe she wanted car insurance money and she set her own car on fire and, made up this whole story about being abducted in the first place. That to me is a little bit hard to swallow because I just can't see a woman alone in the dark in such a desolate area with a baby just hoping, okay, I'm going to burn my car and hope somebody finds me and I can tell this crazy story. So I would hope that she didn't make it up. The story's not made up and that there's some truth to it. As far as Zodiac picking her up, I don't know there's any way to say for sure that it was because, as we know, the Zodiac never did claim, obviously, he claimed in the letter after the fact, but he didn't claim to her while he was riding with her, whoever the attacker was, that he was Zodiac. So she only came to that conclusion once she supposedly saw his sketch of Zodiac on the wall in the police department. And there was a lot of bad people running around in California. So even if she's being truthful, there were a lot of different people in the state that were bad men, that were just abducting people, attacking them, murdering them. I had found a cluster of similar attacks in Southern California, I want to say from 1967, if my memory is correct. And the person down there was using the exact same ruse, just flashing lights, telling their wheel was wobbling, offering to help, and then attacking and having different degrees of success. And I've since found other cases where attackers have done the same thing. So I wonder if that's just something that sort of is known by the bad guys that do that kind of stuff. That's an easy way to get someone to pull over that doesn't want to pull over normally. But again, if she's being truthful and she was attacked by someone, I can believe that. I just don't know if I can buy that it was Zodiac.
I also listened to your podcast with Mike Ferguson on the Zodiac Killer. And in that, you mentioned that on the same evening, two men also described a strange incident along Highway 132. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, you have a witness or witnesses here that are basically saying something along the same lines, that someone out there was trying to get someone to pull over. And that sort of lends credence to Kathleen's claims. So we have a man in a white Buick that is attempting to pull over this witness much the same way that Kathleen Johns was pulled over, and by flagging them, getting their attention. And this person actually pulled over ahead on the road and tried to get them to pull over. So it's in the area, it's close to the same time period, and it could possibly be connected. I don't know that there's enough there to rule it in as being connected or rule it out, but it's certainly interesting that it's around the same location and around the same time frame.
Now, many people in the Zodiac community, Mike, think that the Zodiac Killer may be connected to law enforcement, or he may have served in the military at some point, or still does. So here's a little interesting connection. Kathleen Johns described her abductor as having the traits of a serviceman. Situated in Stanislaus County, the NASA Crow's Landing Air Base was operated by the Navy. It is situated south of the abduction site. If you were heading back to the Bay Area from this location, you would join Interstate 5, which brings you out onto Highway 132, less than 1 mile east of where Kathleen Johns was pulled over. Now, the next communication Zodiac mailed after the Johns abduction was the April the 20th letter. The code contained an 8-ball style character in its design, just like the NASA Crow's Landing military patch. That may be coincidence, but what do you think of any connection to the Zodiac Killer from a military angle?
That's definitely a possibility. We know from some of the clues that in the case, the wing walker boots, for example, from Lake Berryessa, we know that there's a possibility that Zodiac was military or had access to a military base. And we haven't talked about it much in the podcast, but we'll talk about the Sherry Jo Bates case. And in that case, there's a possible military clue. So I don't think we can rule out Zodiac as being connected to the military, at least having access to buy stuff on the base there. And we can go even further. We can go about another case, the Domingos Edwards case in 1963. There's a military connection there possibly. Now, I think we also have to point out, in fairness, there are military bases left and right all over California, up and down the state. So I think anywhere you look, there's a real clue that you're going to find some connection to a base or a base nearby, because they're just all over the place.
Have you placed any credence to the idea the Zodiac killer chose Modesto as his next attack after Presidio Heights because of the challenge laid down by Joe Stein, who worked in Modesto?
I think the timing of that was interesting, and the fact that Joe Stein did work in Modesto. But then again, I think if somebody left a Zodiac note at his gas station where he worked, or made some kind of threat on him, or vandalized his location, that to me would be a little bit more impressive and make me think there's more of a Zodiac connection to it than just a random person that attacks a random woman in that same vicinity. I go back to there were a lot of bad guys all over the place in the state at the time. So I think that's a little bit more random versus something that would specifically target Joe Stein.
It's very unlikely the Zodiac killer, if he lived in the Bay Area, would travel all the way to a remote highway in Modesto just to return back. If it was the Zodiac killer, one would suspect that he was on his way back from a family reunion, he was hunting or hiking, and he was coming back late that night to the Bay Area. I doubt very much he would have just made this journey specifically to target a woman miles away from the Bay Area.
Well, and to your point, one interesting thing, again, I keep giving little hints here about something we haven't talked about, but the possible Southern California activity, especially around Riverside. Basically, Kathleen's ride began in San Bernardino County. She was leaving her home down there, driving up north, and since this attacker came from behind her, we can assume that he was likely traveling in the same direction. So you have some activity that might be Zodiac down there, and then you have this person coming from down that area heading up north behind Kathleen. So, maybe what you're saying is a possibility. Maybe he was down there visiting friends, visiting family, whatever. And if he is Zodiac, maybe he just happened to be coming up north and following her. There's an interesting suspect, and I don't know that we'll ever get to him, but he's certainly interesting as a suspect named Zode. And he lived in San Bernardino, about 2 blocks from Kathleen Johns, if I remember correctly. Now, again, I don't want to tease people because I don't think he was the Zodiac killer, but it was interesting when I looked and saw how close he lived to Kathleen, and he's very interesting as a suspect because of many things about him, but I don't think he was ultimately the Zodiac. But I hope in a future episode we do talk about him because he is a very interesting character.
Yeah, we'll certainly cover that in a fair bit of depth, I should think. But one thing that sets the Zodiac case apart from most serial killers is the amount of communications he sent to the authorities. We know that he claimed this attack, but provided no new material to link himself to the attack specifically. Now, it's been claimed that Kathleen Johns received sinister phone calls and a Halloween card in 1970 addressed to the woman in the blue station wagon. What do you make of this claim, Mike?
Well, I think we see after the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac seems to really take on connections, as far as I can tell, to other Bay Area crimes. And sort of, we know he's a reader. We know he reads the newspaper. And I think when he sees something interesting, a crime that's unsolved, that he can easily take credit for, I think he does do that from time to time. And I think we see more of that after the murder of Paul Stine. So me personally, I think he likely graduated from actually killing people to mainly taking credit for crimes he didn't commit just to play with antagonize the police. So I sort of think along those lines, and it makes me think that he was into doing more of that after he murdered Paul Stine.
The Halloween card sent to Kathleen Johns, she claims she sent it to Paul Avery. Is there any evidence that anybody else set eyes on this communication?
Well, I think of people like yourself, myself, people that have been investigating this case for a long time. You can name anyone, Tom Voigt, Michael Butterfield. I think all of these people, we have access to lots of different stuff in this case. And I don't know that anyone has seen that card. And I think it's likely if it's out there to be seen, someone in this community would have seen it. So for me, I just can't say if it's real. I'm the person that needs to see something documented to believe it. I'm not going to take somebody's word for things after 50 years. I want to see proof that it's documented. So for me to accept that a Halloween card was mailed to her, I need to see proof of that someplace, because I just, seeing is believing.
So I'll ask a final question here. Just before the 340 cipher was mailed, a challenge was laid down by Professor D.C.B. Marsh in the San Francisco Examiner. He said the killer wouldn't dare, as he claimed in letters to the newspapers, to reveal his name in a cipher to establish cryptogram experts. He knows, to quote Edgar Allan Poe, that any cipher created by man can be solved by man. Zodiac has not told the truth in his cipher messages to the Examiner, the Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Zodiac has not done this because to tell the complete truth in relation to his name in cipher code would lead to his capture. I invite Zodiac to send the American Cryptogram Association a cipher code, however complicated, which will truly and honestly include his name. So my question to you, Mike, is what are your thoughts on this cipher? Do you think it will ever be solved? Do you think there is a message in it? And if there is it likely to contain any name whatsoever?
I guess first off, I think Zodiac, although he wanted the attention, he knew that giving his name to anyone would mean that he'd be arrested and held accountable for his crimes. So I personally think out of preservation for himself, he would never even remotely put his real name into a cipher because, as you mentioned, there's just a chance it could be solved no matter how hard he made it. So I think he was a coward. So I would bet that there is no instance when he included his name in the cipher. Now, as far as the construction of the cipher itself, my name is, and it's 13 spaces, 13 characters. You know, I talked to Dave Ranchak about this, and he and his team solved the 340 that was unsolved for 50 years. He's of the opinion that cipher is too short to be solved accurately because there's not enough samples to know what fits. And, you know, to give an example, you know, I could think of a few different suspects whose name you can make fit that cipher in anagram form with the letters of their name being mixed around. But you could fit so many names in there consisting of 13 characters that there's no real way to know which one's right. And I think that's Dave's biggest problem, and I respect him a lot for his knowledge of these ciphers. And so I basically think that it will be tough to know if that really did include his name, if it could be solved in the first place. But it will be interesting if the case is solved one day and we can go back and then reverse engineer things and put his name in there and see if it fits somehow. That's something that I'm looking forward to if the case is solved.
We will be covering the ciphers in more detail in a later podcast. So hopefully we can get Dave Ranchak on one of the podcasts so we can discuss some of the unsolved ciphers in this case.
Yeah, it's a big piece of the case. And unfortunately for me, it's the hardest to wrap my head around. You really have to have a good understanding for ciphers, how they're made, how to solve them. And that's why I always turn to experts that do that kind of thing on a regular basis because it is that hard.
I believe that Dr. Marsh may have been dropping the name Edgar Allan Poe into the Examiner article in the hope Zodiac would adopt a cipher used in one of Poe's writings, making it easier to solve. Now, the 340 can be solved using the Skytail method of decryption. I don't think Dave Ranchak buys into the fact the cipher was decrypted like this, but it can be used to decrypt that cipher. This featured in the opening passage of Poe's essay, A Few Words on Secret Writing, the Skytail method, that is. Then, the 13-symbol cipher began with an A and ended with an M. The second passage in Poe's A Few Words on Secret Writing used a method of encryption where the alphabet was split into two parts of 13, A to M and N to Z. The 13-symbol cipher held 3 circled 8s. The third section in Poe's essay detailed 2 circular discs of encryption. The Union cipher disk from the American Civil War was predominantly made up of the numbers 8 and 1, including the number 888, just like the cipher. The next passage in Poe's essay featured the date of April the 21st in an anonymous letter mailed to Poe. Maybe the Zodiac was hoping his 13-symbol cipher letter would carry this postmark date rather than April the 20th. The last part of the 340 solution read, "Life will be an easy one in paradise death." Edgar Allan Poe wrote a poem regarding the death of his wife. It was called To One in Paradise. Finally, in the 1942 film The Loves of Edgar Allan Poe, a 3-year-old Poe utters the words, "My name is Edgar Poe," when asked by his yet-to-be adoptive parents. Also, it's 13 characters in length. I don't think that's the answer to the 13-symbol cipher, but there's a lot of things there regarding Poe and the ciphers, the solved 340 and the unsolved 13-symbol cipher. So hopefully people on your forum may take a look at Poe's essay, A Few Words on Secret Writing, and may discover the answer to the 13-symbol cipher via that essay.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things of this case is there's so many things to explore and so many rabbit holes to go down. And, I encourage everyone that's interested in that angle to pursue that and see what they think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac. Or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site, zodiacciphers.com, or by going to Mike's site at zodiackillersite.com.
We'd like to take a moment to thank all the people that have reached out to Rich and I to say congrats on starting Zodiac Speaking, or to compliment us on the podcast or the material we've covered so far. We really appreciate all the support, and if you'd like to help us grow, please take a minute to rate us and leave us a review wherever you listen to the show. You can also recommend Zodiac Speaking to your friends. We'll be doing a special Q&A episode coming up, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask, feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can email us questions directly at zodiacspeakingpodcast@gmail.com.